pitch in student learning.
We were there, we saw it.
All right, so the shifts I want to share with you are in science education, and I also want to share with you how we're addressing those key shifts in science education through our continuous curriculum improvement process. And then a recommendation that came from a team of teachers and the evidence that they used to make that recommendation for instructional materials. So the shifts in science education represent changes to how science is taught and learned. The framework for K-12 science education and next generation science standards, published in 2011 and 2013 respectively, called for and detailed these shifts in teaching and learning with an emphasis on access and equity. One way to think about these shifts is that instead of students learning about and memorizing science facts, they get the opportunity to figure out natural phenomena like scientists do. This means that they engage in science and engineering practices to build their own larger scientific conceptions and identities in the process of explaining those phenomena. These shifts are grounded in research. They're grounded in the research in how we learn in general, but also how we learn science. It tells us that science content is best learned by engaging in practices like asking questions, analyzing data, developing and using models, and constructing explanations from evidence. Prior to this current research, teachers were encouraged to identify students' misconceptions and then design lessons to fix those misconceptions. We now understand that children's science-related identities and ideas, whether scientifically accurate or not, are deeply grounded in their personal experiences, and that it's actually very productive to leverage those experiences as they learn science. So what does that look like in the classroom? One instructional model that was designed for the vision for K-12 science education is the anchored inquiry model. We can also call it a storyline. This instructional model includes a coherent set of lessons, all written around a common anchoring phenomenon that drives the learning progression throughout the entire unit. All students experience that anchoring phenomena. Grounding their learning in explaining that phenomenon supports student agency and curiosity for wanting to learn more. The anchoring phenomenon sets the stage for students to conduct a series of lessons to gather, analyze, and communicate information that will help them to figure out and explain the anchoring phenomenon. And then, at key points in the unit, there are lessons that are designed to help students synthesize their ideas and make sense of their experiences. We call these synthesized lessons, or putting the pieces together. And following those lessons, we have what's called a gap analysis lesson, where students get metacognitive, if you will. They think about what they don't know, and that drives the next round of learning. These cycles are typically represented as chapters or sections. Once students have figured out all of the pieces of the puzzle, they synthesize their learning in a final explanation, design, or model called a culminating task. This specific model shows 16 lessons, but depending on the phenomenon or design challenge and student prior knowledge, there may be more or fewer lessons. This particular model represents spiraled learning, in which students have multiple at-bats or opportunities to internalize the science ideas that help explain the phenomenon. Retrieval and space practice are key components to these intentionally designed units. So far, what I've been sharing with you is coming from the national level and those experts at the national level. But that national vision for science education strongly influenced the Nebraska career and college-ready standards for science that were adopted by the State Board of Education in 2017. Our standards were inspired by the framework and call for the same shifts: students figuring out phenomena. The way students do this is not through open-ended inquiry, but through guided inquiry, where students use science and engineering practices, think through the lenses of cross-cutting concepts like looking for patterns or cause and effect relationships, to figure out the science core ideas that help them to explain the phenomenon. Like the next generation science standards, these distinct and equally important dimensions are key to learning science. In our standards here in Nebraska, the three dimensions are combined to form each indicator or performance expectation. And each dimension works with the other two to help students build cohesive understanding of science over time. So what are we doing here in LPS to meet that vision? Well, we're using our continuous curriculum improvement process. So let me share with you where we've been in that process. We started with a team of teachers to first identify our needs. The last middle school curriculum adoption resources were published in 2009, well prior to the adoption of our Nebraska science standards and the next generation science standards. So as you can see, that made our needs assessment list pretty long. We needed materials that gave students authentic science experiences figuring out phenomena, were driven by student questions, and positioned students as capable, just to name a few. Finding curriculum to meet those needs at first was challenging. There weren't many resources available out there. But as those materials became available, we began trying them. And I'm very thankful for the teachers we had in the district who were willing to give those a try. And so from 2017 to 2021, 3 sets of materials were in use across the district: teacher-developed units, Amplify Science, and Open SciEd. During the 2020-2021 school year, rubrics were developed with 4 criteria for collecting data on those units. Those criteria included supports for student sense-making, supports for teachers, student engagement and outcomes, and social and equity considerations. Teachers used those rubrics to analyze the units that they were using in their classrooms, and then in May of 2021, a team of 11 teachers from 6 buildings across the district came together to analyze that data. And as you can see, Open SciEd ended up with the highest average of high ratings. And so their recommendation was that we implement Open SciEd instructional materials. So let me tell you a little bit about Open SciEd. It's an open source NGSS designed set of instructional materials that are free for all teachers to use, customize, and share. Each storyline unit fits within a scope and sequence that provides coherence within and across grade levels. The evaluation by Ed Reports was released in February of this year, and Open SciEd met expectations in all gateways. So how is this influencing what's happening in our classrooms? The first thing I want to share with you are a few thoughts from Megan Euler. She's a middle school teacher at Kohler Middle School. And she was recently interviewed and was a part of an article published this last school year. She says, Open SciEd has transformed the way my students relate and take ownership of their learning. They bring rich life experiences to the classroom, and Open SciEd enables them to talk about those experiences and knowledge more so than any other curriculum I've used. And then hopefully we get to hear from Mr. Dave Beatty and some of our Park Middle School students. Maybe not. Some of you have seen this video before.
Technology. It's fine. It's fine. I can absolutely share with you that video clip at a later date. So where do we go from here? This summer, we're engaging in teacher training around these instructional materials, along with adapting and customizing the materials for our LPS system. We're also in the process of developing common assessments and rubrics to help us score those assessments, collect data on students to inform both in instruction and future revisions. During the 23-24 school year, we plan to implement fully. We're going to continue to support teachers throughout the school year with office hours where they have the opportunity to come in and plan for upcoming units with teachers who have been piloting these materials and just get prepared for using these new instructional materials closer to when they're actually teaching them. Beyond this coming school year, we'll continue to evaluate units, lessons, and assessments to make improvements and also to help us inform professional learning around specifically the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. Implementation of this curriculum connects directly to the board equity goal of improving graduation rates. Using OpenSciEd will provide opportunities, structures, and systems through which we can focus on Tier 1 instruction for all of our teachers through collaboration and reflection on practices. Integrated in these instructional materials are a variety of engagement and relationship building strategies. Perhaps the most exciting part of this curriculum is how it positions our students as capable. Their assets, experiences, and ways of knowing are leveraged throughout the learning process of OpenSciEd. And I'll take any questions, and thank you so much.
Okay. I've got Kathy and then Barb.
Okay. Well, I like the word when you use the word free. That always makes a school board member happy. Because then we know we can do lots of different things. So you talked about the engagement. You talked about the small group. Would you say 12? Did I get it right? 12 individuals?
11 teachers.
11 teachers.
Right, right.
And 6 schools.
Yep.
And we have 13 middle schools, correct?
Yes.
Past experience, when we implement a new curriculum, people's heads sometimes blow off.
Yep.
Because they get a little antsy. So walk me through again how you're going to help teachers that didn't have any introduction to this, because I think that would be their largest concern. What's going to be their backup plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the summer of 2021, we had a group of teachers who went through facilitator training, and we have actually been leading professional development through these materials over the last 3 years. So all of our teachers have been through, after this summer, will have been through over 10 and a half hours of support in professional development for implementing these materials. Lindsay Roy and I also went out last spring and met with PLC, middle school PLCs, and kind of had a town hall situation where they could ask any questions, voice any concerns. And we've taken those concerns and those recommendations and built out supports for them, including websites that house all of the materials along with our traditional science website that houses the materials, along with building some what do I want to say? Smaller teacher guides. When you get the teacher guides to this type of instructional materials, they're pretty thick and they can be pretty overwhelming. And so we've tried to simplify how teachers can access those materials. And I'm really hoping that these office hours that we hold right before first quarter, right before second quarter, right before third quarter, right before fourth quarter, where teachers can come in and collaborate and learn from our experts in the district, will help support that implementation as well.
And did I just hear you say that we're housing this within our computer system so we don't have to get it from a national website somewhere where they would have a double glitch and we wouldn't have it for science classes?
You are correct.
Okay. And then the last question is, how does it prepare kids to make those choices for the more intense science curriculum as they go into high school?
Yeah, so one of the main shifts in the vision for science education, which is spelled out by our standards, is really to develop those critical thinking skills. So I'll use the cliche, we're not just going to give them a fish, we're going to teach them how to fish. We're going to teach them how to problem solve like scientists do by looking for patterns, looking for cause and effect relationships, thinking about systems and system models so that when they go into some of those honors courses in high school, they already have those high-level critical thinking skills that will help them solve those problems.
So when I was a kid, science was biology, physiology, and chemistry, and I was afraid of all three. As I've grown up and watched my kids go through school and my grandkids, I've raised my awareness that science is in everything we do, whether it's in a home economics or family consumer science class, because if you get the wrong ratios, it doesn't work. I'm going to make an assumption, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, that this also prepares kids for the engineering sciences, those advanced courses that are going to lead them to the world of work that they all love to play in. Am I correct?
You are.
Yay.
Yeah.
You're making science relevant.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And I just would add to that, the opportunity for kids to bring their own experiences to the table. Each unit kicks off with that opportunity for students to connect directly to what it is that they're all having that common experience around.
We actually did that at my house with a common experience of making bread. And they had to make the yeast raise and figure out how to do it. And if it didn't work, what happened? So I'm glad you're making it relevant. That's awesome.
Thanks.
So thank you. Sounds
You bet.
like a great opportunity.
Barb, then Annie.
Well, thank you for a very good presentation. This sounds exciting. I was wondering, pardon me, where Open SciEd comes from. Who developed this?
That's a great question. So it comes from science education researchers. The two main groups are at Northwestern University in Chicago, and the other one is at the University of Colorado, Boulder. It's also turned into a partnership with BSCS, the Biological Curriculum, Biological Sciences Curriculum, and I always forget the S. Anyway, this is a group that's been around since the 70s and originated actually probably the most well-known inquiry model out there, which is called the 5E model, which is used in science. And so we know that the research behind what's happening in these units is solid. Here's the other cool thing about this. These units have been tested in hundreds of classrooms across, I believe, 12 different states, and they've gone through iteration every time. And so the developers are working with teachers. Teachers are some of the developers, and so they're able to go out and basically do action research as these units are being implemented, collect the data, interview kids, look for those relevant phenomena, because they talk to kids and ask them what they're interested in. So I would argue that the research base behind this is strong, and not just from a theoretical perspective, but also in practice.
And who funded this?
Gosh, NSF. And, you know, it was all grant funded and this goes back to just after 2011 and 2013. So when that national vision for science education came out, and along with the next generation science standards. What I would say about that, however, is that this is in a way our next iteration on inquiry and what inquiry looks like in the classroom. And advocates for inquiry in the science classroom have been around since John Dewey. So we just, as science educators and as scientists, we get new information and we try to do better.
Could you send us some of the answers that you gave us on where this came from, and the National Science Foundation, and some of the, you don't have to drill down real deep,
Okay.
but just so that we have an idea of where this came from?
Sure.
If you
Because,
could send it to me, I'll put it out in the information.
yeah, that would
Okay.
be great.
You bet.
Because it's unusual to have something that's free, that's of high quality, and I just want to see who did all this wonderful
Sure.
work.
Sure. I understand where you're coming from. I think one of the important motivators of this work, though, was that all students have access to high-quality instructional materials. that was one of the driving goals or outcomes that these groups were working towards.
It sounds really good. Thank you.
You bet.
Annie?
So full transparency, I get to work with Ms. Barrett a little bit because of working at a science museum and as a non-scientist at a science museum. And I think, am I correct that the thinking behind this is not new? The phenomena-based, the helping kids to give an anchor statement and do some inquiry, that part is not new.
Correct.
Our teachers have been working through that language for about 3 or 4 years, correct?
Yes, yes.
So this is more like, and they've had access to Open SciEd because some teachers have been using it. I do know that, like.
Yes.
Yes, that some of them, so we have been using this material because the whole concept of phenomena and inquiry is kind of a mind bender change in how you let people learn.
Yes.
Quite frankly.
Mhm.
But I think it's like making it not just relevant, but interesting.
Yes.
So that came out as the other part, and I think that I'm pretty excited that, and the other part is that Amplify, they've had a chance to use Amplify and Open SciEd. It's just that you were finally getting data, am I correct?
Yep.
On which one did the job the best, or how teachers could use it.
Yes.
Am I correct on that?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So just kind of trying some clarity there, that is really, it's not a brand-new thing that now we're saying open up Open SciEd and go for it. That they've been doing it for a while. I personally, in my own work, find Open SciEd very interesting because it does help me to understand like a phenomena, like I jokingly said, but Brian trying to open up the computer was a phenomena. So it's not a natural event, but kind of a natural event for Brian maybe, but that being kind of like your brain kind of changes it. So that was kind of, I just wanted to make sure that the use of Open SciEd is kind of the new thing, that this is what we're saying we support you do. It's not that Open SciEd being used is a new idea.
Right, right.
And we're not buying some other, Amplify we had to buy, correct?
Yes, correct.
So we're not buying Amplify anymore. Are we going to buy Amplify?
Sorry. 3rd through 5th grade, we already have Amplify is implemented in place. But in middle school, we also did not pay for Amplify. We were a part of a study through WestEd. And we had 3 schools that were using those materials during that time. So, and the thing I would just add on is that prior to, I would say the last 5 or 6 years, we didn't have instructional materials that were really very clear about what phenomena-driven inquiry looks like in the classroom, and now we do. Now we do. That's one of the bigger changes, things to be excited about, because like you're mentioning, inquiry's been around for a long time as an approach.
Yeah, and am I correct in that we probably haven't hit figuring out whether it's helping kids in science in high school yet? Like, we don't have the data yet on the use of this style of thinking on whether it has improved our science testing once they get to high school. Am I correct?
Correct.
So that would be coming in the next couple of years. It would be like, because our science is often kind of, I don't remember what our science level is, quite frankly. But this would be interesting to see if it either lowers it or raises our numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Don?
I apologize if you may have already addressed this, but I just want to be sure that I'm clear in terms of support. In the software development world, there's this concept of open source software, which is free and you can do cool stuff with it. But if something goes wrong, you're kind of out of luck for support and you just have to turn to Google or whatever to try to solve the problem. In a situation like this, we're hosting it ourselves, I heard you say. So in terms of connectivity, networking, things like that, we're taking ownership of that. But if there's something software-wise that ends up being problematic, where does our support come from? Is there a support package we can purchase, or how does that work?
Not that I'm aware of. And so the way this works is you can, when you go to the Open SciEd website, you download the units. It puts it straight into your Google Drive. And so we have control over what what's in those folders for those units, for those lessons, and then in terms of, if we want to add anything in terms of a support material, we can. The only thing I can think of that might be an issue, like you're mentioning, is there are some simulations that students use to develop different science concepts, say maybe about an ecosystem and how populations change within an ecosystem. If we run into those troubles, as far as I know, we don't have anybody we can go to directly, but I do know that there are alternatives out there to their simulations. Their simulations are all open sourced also, so maybe that just compounds that problem potentially. But I think that's why we are taking control over it, and we have so many teachers out there with tools in their toolbox that I think we have alternatives for anything that might cause us trouble.
So it sounds like this is more a collection of coursework materials, things like that, and not so much a system or a software package.
Correct.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, I just want to say thank you for the presentation tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation to the Student Learning Committee. And I'm very excited about this. The best way to learn science is to do science.
Yes.
And that's what this curriculum's all about. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
That brings us to public comment. I have no blue cards. That brings us to the consent agenda. Are there any items to be